Welcome to another episode of 40 Minutes in the Old Testament. 40 Minutes in the Old Testament is a 1517 Podcast Network podcast. You can go to 1517.org/podcast and check out all the other podcasts that are living over there. And while you're over there, make sure you check out everything else that 1517 is doing. All the things, all the articles, the other podcasts, videos, academies, events. I mean, all the things that we're doing. And if you want to support all those things, of course, you can click on the donate link and become a contributor. You can give a one-time gift, become a reoccurring supporter. Thank you so much to those of you who do that. You keep us doing all this, and you keep it free for people all over the world to consume it. And so we are very appreciative of all that. We are in Isaiah chapter 6. Only made it through 7 verses last episode, but Isaiah is giving you a little backstory here. He's going to tell you how he came to be the one who was sent. Right? The one who, why you, Isaiah? He's saying, woe to me for this, and woe to this other guy for that, and the judgment of the Lord is coming, and what makes you the person that speaks for God? And Isaiah says, well, let me tell you, I saw the Lord, and I was freaked out by it. And before I said woe to you, I said woe to me, because there I was, unclean lips and all, and I couldn't do anything. And then the Lord did what he does, which is forgave my sins, took away my iniquity, had my guilt all taken away. I was all atoned for, and that's kind of where we ended. Isaiah has been redeemed, as it were, in this situation, and we're going to start with Isaiah's next thing. And then I heard God ask a question.
Yeah. So we'll see if he's able to use that mouth now, right?
Yeah.
His mouth has been cleansed. He's a man of unclean lips, lived among all these folks with unclean lips. So at least his mouth is clean. And he becomes, as it were, an example of what the Lord can do, even with a person of unclean lips. Well, God has his ways of taking care of that guilt and that uncleanness and that sin by means of atonement. He did that for Isaiah. He can do that for other people too. The real question that faces us as we get ready to dive into these next few verses, especially verses 9 and 10, will be, do the people have ears to hear? Isaiah's lips are clean. Sin's been atoned for. He's got the Lord's words to preach. Will there be anybody who has ears to hear and hearts to understand? And we're going to find out the answer to that question real quick. So, as soon as the angel does his thing and speaks his words, your sin's atoned for, your guilt's taken away, then Isaiah goes on in verse 8 to say this. And I heard, a lot of senses. He sees, he speaks, he feels, now he hears the voice of the Lord. And here's what he says. Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? It's kind of a loaded question, especially given the fact that Isaiah is presumably alone when he hears these words. Any ideas as to who we can send, who can go for us? And Isaiah raises his hand, and at this point, it's not like he has a choice. He says, "Here am I, send me." I've multiple times, anytime I talk about this chapter, joke and say, I wonder if after hearing the commissioning, if Isaiah regretted, if he'd have said, well, I know a guy that you could send. It's this guy, he's really astute in the scriptures, very pious. I think he'd probably be open to this prophetic call. Let me get in contact with him. You can send him. He can go for you.
After reading the book of Isaiah, I do think that if I was in a situation, I might be tempted in this situation where God said, hey, who am I going to send? Who's gonna go for us? I'm like, what exactly are you going to have him do?
Can we have more details?
I might be down for it, but what exactly is this job entail? Can I get a job description?
Yeah.
But Isaiah signs up, just says, hey, you just need someone to go? I'll go. And God says, oh, it's not just about the going. It's about the saying. See, anybody can go. But the hard part is going to be what I'm going to have you do with that mouth I just made clean.
Isaiah's sort of the un-Moses. Moses comes up with a whole string of excuses. I can't do this. What am I going to tell people? What signs are you going to give me? What about my brother Aaron? He's a lot more rhetorically skilled than I am. But Isaiah, he maybe, having known how Moses reacted, Isaiah's like, I'm not going to go down that road. I'm going to go ahead and just volunteer. So here I am, send me. And he said, okay, well, here's what I want you to go and say to this people. Here's your mission statement, Isaiah. Keep on hearing, but do not understand. Keep on seeing, but do not perceive. Make the heart of this people dull, and their ears heavy, and blind their eyes. And now we have the reverse order. Lest they see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their hearts, and turn, and be healed. At this point, I'm thinking Isaiah is wondering, well, he goes on to say how long, but he's probably thinking, oh, this is not probably what I had envisioned as my mission statement. So yeah, there's so many things you could talk about here. Just on the surface, as I just mentioned, notice how there's reverse. We go from heart, ears, eyes, to eyes, ears, hearts. So kind of a nice little chiasm there, envelope structure that's going on here. But once you get beyond the kind of the literary fashioning of these words into what they entail, then at least initially, and I think probably still for a lot of people, they're pretty disturbing. What are you talking about? Lest they see with their eyes, and lest they hear with their ears, and lest they understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed. What's going on here? So let me, I don't usually put out resources just on the podcast, but I'll make an exception now. I read this book, probably several years ago, and I have often recommended it to folks. It's by G.K. Beale, Beale. I've read a lot of stuff by him and have always been impressed by his work, but this book in particular was helpful for me in understanding not just Isaiah 6, but a whole lot of other texts that are like it. The title is "We Become What We Worship," and it's basically a biblical theology of idolatry. And one of the opening chapters is Isaiah 6. And one of his, just kind of summarize his argument, which I find to be convincing, is in using this language of the ears not hearing and the eyes not seeing and the heart's not understanding. What Isaiah is doing is, what God is doing as he speaks to Isaiah, he's drawing upon a very prevalent theme that you find throughout the Old Testament, where idols have eyes, but they do not see, ears, but they do not hear, a mouth, but they do not speak, hands, but they do not feel, feet, but they cannot walk. It'll go through this list of the anatomy of these idols that people's hands have made and point out that they may have all of these body parts that are supposed to do certain functions, but they don't. They have unhearing ears and unseeing eyes. And what's happening here with this use of that kind of language here in reference to the people is that, to use the title of G.K. Beale's book, they have become what they worship. So because they have worshipped idols, their own ears do not hear. Because they worshipped idols, their own eyes do not see, so on and so forth. So as one, I don't know if this is Psalm 115. Anyway, one of the passages about idolatry says that they have become like them. So we resemble what we revere. We become what we worship. And so they have become dead in their trespasses and sins because they have worshipped that which is lifeless, that which is dead. So by the inclusion of this kind of language, what is happening in these couple of verses, 9 and 10 of Isaiah 6, is that the people have become like the idols which they worship, which we heard about in those opening 5 chapters. And as a result of that, they're not hearing, they're not seeing, their hearts are dull. And to build on that, therefore, what Isaiah is going to do as he preaches these words from God is that he's going to put the truth in front of these people. He's going to speak the truth of God. He's going to say whatever words that God has given him to say. And the people who have already gone the way of idolatry and hardened their hearts and closed their eyes and everything else, become like the idols they worship, they will, as it were, double down on their rejection of the Word of God, so that they are basically given what they already want to have. They've already chosen this way. They've already gone this route. And Isaiah's preaching to them is going to double down that effect upon them that they have already chosen because of their idolatry. That's at least the initial way of thinking about these. There's New Testament background that we can get to as well.
I think one of the things that's sort of jarring about it is that it doesn't seem as though God's goal for Isaiah is to go and sort of initially bring these people to repentance. It's just not. And so what you'd maybe expect to hear is that, well, these people, they keep hearing, but they don't understand, and they see, but they don't perceive because their hearts are dull, and so I'm going to have you go and change that. I'm going to go have you preach a word that fixes that. But that's not what it is. It's this is what's going on, and I'm going to have you go and speak the truest words that could be spoken. They're going to, in order, the purpose of those words is to increase the condemnation. So, when Paul says that the law was given to increase the trespass, and people are like, oh, that's that I don't like that. That makes me think bad things about the law or whatever. Mm-hmm. But this is what it is. And so what is Isaiah going to go preach? Well, I mean, we've seen him preach some promise, but it's sort of just sandwiched in between like all of this judgment and law language. And what that preaching is going to do is that you're going to hear the law that Isaiah preaches, and you're going to reject it. You're going to disregard it. And what this does is it increases the trespass. It's like God is interested in sort of increasing the evidence against the people, right? So like judgment is coming. He has already decided, right? And when God decides that he's going to judge, like this is what judgment is coming, and it's coming hard. And what he's doing is he's going to use Isaiah initially to just pile up the evidence against the people. This is his job as a preacher of the law, and that's every preacher of the law's job is to say, I have. When you have on the hat of the law, your goal is not to try to make the people better. Or to do any kind of improvements here. It's to pile up evidence. That's what it is. And that's what Isaiah is going to do. God says, yeah, you're going to go speak these words. And the plan is for them to keep on hearing and not perceiving. The heart is supposed to grow more dull, not less.
Well, everything you said is a perfect transition to how this comes up in the New Testament too, then. You're talking about piling up of evidence. You work your way through Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and the evidence keeps on piling up until you finally you get to the ultimate rejection of God's will and ways and words, and not just that, but God himself. Like, hey, let's just kill this guy. So it all leads directly to the crucifixion. And that's why in Matthew 13, in Mark 4, in Luke 8, and in John 12, as well as in Acts 28, Isaiah 6 is quoted to that effect.
Yeah.
So it's taking what was fitting during Isaiah's ministry and saying this continues to apply. Isaiah's ministry is like the ministry of Jesus. And Paul, in quoting it in Acts 28, is saying what happened in Isaiah's ministry and what happened in Jesus' ministry continues to happen in the apostolic ministry as well. So there's an ongoing application of these verses from Isaiah 6, because, of course, there's an ongoing preaching of the law, which is intended to pile up these sins.
Yeah, you got to think about it like this. I mean, you got to think about the intent of God as he's commissioned someone out there. Isaiah is being sent as a prosecutor, not a defense attorney.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about that.
That's what he's going to go do.
Yeah, his goal is not to exonerate the accused, but to pile up the accusations against the accused.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, you think things are bad? Well, they're about to get worse. Let me show you how this is going to happen. So with this commissioning, this mission given to Isaiah, he naturally asked, how long, O Lord? I mean, is this like a temporary deal? What's the goal? Do I have a time frame in which to preach this message? And here's God's response. Until cities lay waste without inhabitant, and houses without people, and the land is a desolate waste, and the Lord removes people far away, and the forsaken places are many in the midst of the land. And though a tenth remain in it, it will be burned again, like a terebinth or an oak, whose stump remains when it is felled. The holy seed is its stump. Well, there's your answer. That's how long.
Yeah.
So how long is until there's a whole lot of destruction that takes place? That's how long, Isaiah. There's going to be cities laid waste, houses desolate, people removed. The whole land is going to be just one big forsaken space. All you can have left is a remnant. And this remnant at the end, the holy seed is in its stump, or a tenth remain in it. That's taken a couple different ways. G.K. Beale, that I just mentioned a few minutes ago, he argues that this is like even the remnant are going to be ruined and destroyed. I tend to gravitate more to the idea of this going to be a remnant that remains.
Yeah.
There's going to be at least some who continue to hold fast to the truth. People like Isaiah and others that you meet throughout the history of First and Second Kings.
Yeah, I do like that. You have to think Isaiah is a guy that just had his sins forgiven, right? So I mean, he knows that this is something that God does. He just did it, right? Mm-hmm. And then so he's like, well, this is the word that I'm giving you. I'm going to have you go out there. And I'm going to have you pile up so much evidence that like the legitimacy of my judgment cannot even be questioned. And Isaiah's like, okay, well, like, how long am I doing that? Like, surely there is an end to that. I mean, I am a sinner after all, who just had all his sins forgiven. Like, so certainly I'll do that, and I'm going to do that for surely just a period of time. But and then and God says, oh, well, let me tell you how long. I'm not going to give you a time frame. I'm going to tell you you're going to do it until this happens, and it's just cities lying waste, and there's no inhabitants left, and and there's a tenth of the people are left, and then like it's going to happen again, like something's going to be burned again. But then you have this one little. I mean, it's just a little glimmer. It's like it's going to be reduced down to this stump. It's all that's left. It's just a stump. And you're like, well, that's basically nothing then. So you mean nothing? He's like, no, not nothing. A stump. And that holy seed is going to come from that stump. There is going to be something left, something that looks like nothing, something that is just dead. But that's what's going to remain, and this is going to happen until that's all that's left. And then, and this is how God works. That He's going to work His salvation from what only He could work it from, right? Which is like, I'm going to remove everything else, and then it's just going to be this stump that's left, and then that's where I'm going to bring salvation in.
Then He has something He can work with.
Yeah. Got to have nothing before God starts working, right?
Yeah. It's Martin Luther on the Magnificat, God began the world by creating everything from nothing, and He proceeds in that same way still today. Nothing is His favorite material with which to work. The less He has, then the more He has to work with. So I'll give Him a stump, and He can work His divine work by giving life from that stump. So that's the commissioning. That's what Isaiah has cut out for him, and we'll see, of course, as we work our way through the rest of the book how this works out.
This is a tough call, by the way, too. Like, I'm just going to go say all these things. By the way, it's going to end disastrously. Like, this is how it is with like the prophets so often, where it's like, hey, what's my job here? It's like, well, you're going to go preach the law, okay, and then everyone's going to repent, and I'm going to live to see like the restoration of all things, right? No. it's going to go awful.
Yeah, I mean, even in Jeremiah, I mean, at least Jeremiah arguably has a more depressing ministry than Isaiah does. But even in Jeremiah, I was trying to find the reference here, where God tells him, he's gonna tear down, but here it is. He says, you're going to pluck up and break down, destroy and overthrow, but also to build and to plant, There's not much building and planting going on in this commissioning to Isaiah. But that is the prophetic calling. I mean, of all the vocations in the history of humanity that God has given to people, the prophetic calling was rough. I mean, you're speaking hard truths. You're more often than not, martyred as a result of it. That's why Jesus says, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you that stone the prophets and kill those that God sends to you." That was the prophetic calling.
Yeah. This is the call to what you want to be called to is like, can I be part of the building process? And you're like, no. Sorry, you're only a part of the clearing the land process.
Yeah. Which, explains, too, if people wonder why John the Baptist was so rough and in your face and, you brood of vipers and all of this real raw, destructive, fiery language. Well, he was a prophet.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what they did, and he prepared the way for the Lord by destroying. He had some pretty rough preaching that he had to do, and he was getting things ready for the Messiah. But when you make a highway, there's a lot of destruction that takes place. You got to tear some stuff up.
You got to make those paths straight, man, and that's dirty work. I mean, when you're making the path straight, that's not the building process. That is the clearing process.
Yeah. And I mean, it was like almost. Did John have to die? Well, he was a prophet. I mean, that's what happens to prophets.
Yep.
They lose their heads.
You can't be the greatest prophet and not have that happen to you, of course, right? I mean, Jesus says he's the last and the greatest. Like, of course it was going to go that way.
No prophet retired to Florida and spent his final days on the beach. Didn't happen that way. Okay, so chapter 6 done. One episode and a half. Not too bad. Not too bad. Now, we got a major shift that goes on here. So we are done with the call of Isaiah, this great vision he sees of Christ in his glory. We're done with the commissioning as to what he's to preach. So we're going to move now from the death of one king. Of course, Isaiah 6 begins in the year that King Uzziah died. And in chapter 7, we're going to skip ahead to the next king, not the next king in sequence, but another king. This is the final king under which Isaiah was preaching, which also underscores the fact that these chapters are not structured chronologically. It's not like one day Isaiah decided to sit down and write a book in which he chronologically recorded his various episodes and sermons to the people of Israel. There's back and forth chronologically as you work your way through the book. So this is the days of Ahaz. Now, if you don't remember anything about Ahaz, Ahaz received a big fat F on his kingly report card. He was not a great, wonderful Josiah or Hezekiah kind of king, quite the opposite. So I'll talk more about him in just a minute, but let me kind of set this up here by reading the first two verses of Isaiah 7. In the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, son of Uzziah, king of Judah, Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, the king of Israel. So we got three kings here. We got Ahaz, he's the king of Judah. You got Rezin, he's the king of Aram or Syria. And then you have Pekah, who's the king of the northern kingdom of Israel. So these three kings. In those days, Rezin and Pekah came up to Jerusalem to wage war against it, but could not yet mount an attack against it. When the house of David was told, Syria is in league with Ephraim, the heart of Ahaz and the heart of his people shook as the trees of the forest shake before the wind. Now someone who lives in the midst of pine trees when a windstorm comes up and I see those trees blowing around. This is a pretty memorable image for me. So what's going on here historically? Well, you can read all about this if you simply look up sometime the Syro-Ephraimitic Wars. That's the wars of Syria, or also known as Aram, and Ephraim, which is the northern part of Israel, the northern kingdom. They pair up. They ally themselves one to another, Syria and Israel, in order to have at least a chance against the Assyrians, who are coming in hot and heavy into now their part of the world. So this is when Syria begins to dominate the whole region. And as they push westward, closer and closer to Syria, as well as to the northern kingdom, then these guys are like, man, we got to do something. So rather than fighting each other, why don't we team up? And so we'll maybe have a chance against the Assyrians. Well, of course, the more allies you have in your little league, then the more powerful you're going to be. So what they wanted to do, what the Syrians under Rezin and what the Israelites under Pekah wanted to do, was to bring Judah into this as well. So they wanted to bring Ahaz into their little league of nations so they have more power to withstand the Assyrians. But Ahaz was having nothing to do with it. He didn't want to be part of this league. In fact, what he's going to do, this is not part of Isaiah 7, but what he's going to do is actually turn on them, and he's going to go to the Assyrians and say, hey, if I pay you a lot of money, will you protect me from these guys? So Ahaz is actually going to turn his back on the northern kingdom of Israel. He's going to turn his back on the Syrians, the Arameans, and he's going to join force. He's going to traitor to his own country, in which he is going to finally ask the biggest dog on the block, the Assyrians, to protect him. But that's kind of the historical background that we're looking at here. So they come up to Jerusalem to wage war against it, and their idea was, the goal of this was to force the hand of the Judeans to join them in this league against the Assyrians. And they're shaken in the wind when they hear that they're in league, these other nations are in league against them. Now the question is, kind of with all this historical setup, what does God want Ahaz to do? So what would he have the king do? Well, he's going to tell him, because he's going to use Isaiah to be his spokesperson. So verse 3, the Lord said to Isaiah, go out to meet Ahaz, you and Shear-Yashuv, that's his son's name, means a remnant shall return. The prophet's children often had these symbolic names, and of course this is one of those. Hosea had his strangely named 3 children with Gomer, and Isaiah also has his strangely named kids as well. So you and a remnant shall return, Shear-Yashuv. You two go out to the end of the conduit of the upper pool on the highway to the washer's field. It's kind of a long description, basically saying that where the king is at is where they're no doubt making preparations for the siege which is to come. So they know that these guys are going to be attacking them. And so they want to make sure, as every city did, of course, when there was the possibility of a siege is coming, 2 of the things you definitely wanted to stock up on or have access to is food and water. And at this point, so maybe you've read about Hezekiah's tunnel. Hezekiah is not around yet, so the tunnel has not yet been dug. There is still ways in which to get water into the city, especially from the spring Gihon. And so that's what they're working on here, to make sure there's going to be access to water when the siege happens. So he goes out to meet him, and here's what he says to him. Be careful, be quiet, do not fear, and do not let your heart be faint because of these 2 smoldering stumps of firebrands. What is he talking about with these firebrands? He goes on to say, at the fierce anger of Rezin and Syria and the son of Remaliah. Because Syria, with Ephraim and the son of Remaliah, has devised evil against you, saying, let us go against Judah and terrify it. and let us conquer it for ourselves, and let us set up the son of Tabeel as king in the midst of it. So this is God's way of saying, basically, listen, Ahaz, I know that you're thinking you need to do something. I know that you're the king, and one of the king's responsibilities, of course, is to make sure that his nation is safe, is secure from the threats of any enemies. And I know that you're plotting as to what you might do in order to ensure the ongoing safety of the people of Judah. You got ideas. Of course, God already knows this. But he's saying to him, basically, all those political plans that you have, I want you to drop them, trash them. Here's what I want you to do instead. Be careful. Be quiet. Don't be afraid. And don't let your heart be faint. Because these leaders of Syria and the Israelites in the Northern Kingdom that you're so threatened by, so that you and your people's hearts are shaking like the trees in the forest shake before the wind. You know what these guys are? They're nothing more than a couple of smoldering stumps of firebrands. They're nothing more than a couple of pieces of wood. Yeah, they were on fire, but the fire's gone out, and all they're doing now is smoldering. They devised evil against you, and they're going to, set up a puppet king, whoever the son of Tabeel is. Nobody knows who that son of Tabeel is. But anyway, someone that they've picked out is going to be a yes, sir man to them, just a puppet king. They're going to set him up in your place. Well, don't be afraid of any of that.
Yeah, which is weird. It's so strange to come off of, hey, Isaiah, here's what I'm going to have you say. It's all going to be horrible. And then just be like, oh, don't be afraid of these guys. You're like, what? This is almost like when Jesus says in Luke, like, don't be afraid of men, like, because they can kill the body but do nothing to the soul, but you should fear God who can destroy both body and soul in hell or whatever. And it is interesting that, like, if your fear is in the right place, this would be like your awe, your reverence, all this stuff, your worship. Then you don't need to be afraid of men, right? And wouldn't you know it that of course, like even kings and the people of God, they always fear the wrong thing. It's like, well, if you just fear the Lord, you just worship the Lord, then you wouldn't need to be afraid of any of these things. But since you don't, you are, and that's the I think the way to sort of like smooth that out, where you're like, oh, if the judgment is coming, and we know God uses other peoples to bring about that judgment, and this is not going to be an exception to that. I mean, he's going to do that in Isaiah's day for sure. But God's still admonition is still just like, why are you afraid of people? Mm-hmm. The only reason you would have to be afraid of people is if you didn't fear me. Because if you feared me, you wouldn't have any reason to be afraid of people.
Yeah, people love the quote, there's nothing to fear but fear itself. And it's actually not biblical. That's not the way the Bible addresses these situations. You should not fearing fear. Fearing fear itself is nothing. I mean, that's not the solution, is to stop fearing. It's to fear God. That's a solution, because
you have some like jealous God stuff going on here. Like, I feel like we're they're all like concerned about these people, and God's like, man, they afraid of these burning stumps over here, and you're you have all your attention paid to this. This is what you're talking about. This is what you're worrying about. Meanwhile, you disregard me all the time. Mm-hmm. And like there, you could see like the that when God says He's a jealous God, you kind of see some of that where you're like, you're out here thinking these things are so awesome and so terrifying, but somehow you can turn your back on me like it's nothing. What is that?
We've talked before about the spiritual insanity of human beings, and this is another example of that. You got, I mean, to use a negative image, it's like this guy standing behind you with a baseball bat, ready to swing it, and you're worried about an ant crawling on your toe. your fear is directed to the wrong place.
Yeah.
Here's God to put a positive spin on it, who's right behind you, who's bigger and better than anything, and is able to do for you what he promises to do for you. And you're sitting there worrying about all of these minor things, fearing, loving, and trusting in everything except him.
Yeah.
So be careful instead, and be quiet, and stop being afraid of these smoldering stumps, because I'm on your side. I'm right here. And he goes on. I read through verse 6. Verse 7 is going to shift from prose to poetry. God is going to go on to say, "Thus says the Lord God, it shall not stand, it shall not come to pass. For the head of Syria is Damascus," that's the capital city, "and the head of Damascus is Rezin." So we have country, we have capital, we have king. "And within 65 years," he goes on, "within 65 years, Ephraim will be shattered from being a people." Ephraim is just another name for the northern kingdom. "And the head of Ephraim is Samaria," that's the capital. "And the head of Samaria is the son of Remaliah." So we got countries, Syria, Ephraim. We have capitals, Damascus, Samaria. And then we have kings, Rezin and the son of Remaliah. So within 65 years, these guys are gone. In fact, it's going to be even less than 65 years. But yeah, these guys that you are so worried about, that you think are just, a great threat to your well-being and even your life itself, they are about to pass out of existence. Country, capital, and king, they're all going to be destroyed. And having kind of said all of that, we now shift to one of these beautiful word plays that you have going on in Isaiah. I'll just read it to you. So in ESV, it is, "If you are not firm in faith, you will not be firm at all," which is a pretty good translation to kind of capture the word play that's going on here. It's even better in the Hebrew. It is, "If you do not ta aminu, then you will not te amenu." If you will not ta aminu, then you will not te amenu. Now, the root of both of those words in Hebrew is the root from which we get amen. It's the idea of stability, of faithfulness, of security, all these sorts of things. So if you won't trust, then if you're not firm in faith, then you're not going to be firm at all. It's basically God's way of calling the king, and really the whole household of David, really the whole people of Judah, to direct their trust in him, direct their fear in him, rather than directing it toward all the threats which are around them. So it's a call to actually know that the Lord who's speaking to him is trustworthy and will fulfill what he's promised.
Yeah, I mean, the idea here, right, is, and I think that that "you" there is plural, right? So that this is
Yes.
all the peoples. So, hey, if you're not going to be firm in faith, you're not going to be, right? You will just cease. So these are the options, right? So the options are to trust in me or just not exist.
Mm-hmm.
There's no other.
Pretty stark contrast.
Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, and
it's almost like you got to be firm in faith, or you won't need to worry about being firm in anything else, right? Because you won't be around.
Yeah, it's the stark contrast we have often in the scriptures. You either you build your house on the rock, or you build your house on the sand. It's one of the other. It's either a house built on the trustworthy promises of God and your faith in those promises, therefore, or it's a house on sand, which is, of course, going to be washed away when the storms come. So that is the stark contrast is put in front of King Ahaz. And when we come back in the next episode, we'll see how he responds to that. We'll talk about the famous Isaiah 7:14 passage, the virgin shall conceive, and then talk about the context of that follows in the rest of the chapters. So good stuff to
Yeah.
get to next time.
Yeah, gonna get a little messianic prophecy going on next episode. So make sure you come back for that. All right, Chad. I'll see you then.
All right, see you then.